How are you going to draw your students into the conversation? And I really mean that. I hope that you'll think about an online discussion in terms of conversation, that you are going to get your students talking with each other, of course, but also how are you going to be talking with them. And I think the best way to do that is to prompt them well so that they want to engage in the conversation. And when I say prompts, really what I'm talking about then is asking the right kinds of questions. And I say asking the right kinds of questions because not all questions are created equal. Of course, there are convergent questions, and a convergent question is where there is one right answer, and by asking the question, you're going to try to get everyone to agree on one right answer. There are times where, of course, you would want to ask a convergent question, but what I found is in an online discussion, convergent questions are not much of a conversation, really. The first person says, here's the answer, and everyone else says, yep, that's the answer. And so instead, I'd encourage you to think about using divergent questions, where the question that you ask prompts lots of possibilities of different directions that students can go as they answer the question. So how do you do that? Well, there's a couple different ways that I found. One of them is to say, share an example of where you've seen this. And so whatever the topic is you're talking about in class, tie it to their personal experience and get them to share a specific example. You could also have them go and do some research and bring back a resource to say, here's an article that talks about this, or here's a video clip that talks about this. Okay? But I think an even more powerful way than going out looking for someone else's story is to tell their own story. If you can ask them and encourage them to share their own specific example of a way that they've seen this happen. I love this graphic, storytelling is a Trojan horse for learning. I really believe that. We as teachers often tell great stories that engage students and help them to learn, but students have great stories to tell too. And to ask the right kind of question where it invites them to share their story can be a very powerful learning experience. Along with that, I think that offering students choices in the prompt that they respond to can actually improve the quality of the response that they give. If you just give them one question, one prompt, some students just might not feel very engaged by that particular prompt. But if they have several to choose from among, there will probably be one that really resonates with them, and they'll write more passionately in response to that, and you'll get a better sense of what they're feeling and thinking by reading that response. So I'm not saying for every discussion, for every module, you have to give multiple threads, multiple prompts, but if it's reasonable to do that, it might be a really engaging tool or technique for you and your students. One last thing that I want to bring up here is to think about the level of questions that you're asking. This is Bloom's Taxonomy, which is pretty famous and familiar to some of you probably. The idea is that the further down you are at the bottom here, like remembering is a relatively low-level thinking skill, but the higher you go up the pyramid here, creating or evaluating or analyzing, those are very high-level thinking skills that take a lot of cognitive demand. To just remember something or even to understand something doesn't demand very much of the students. And so the kind of question that you ask can really, well, you can help foster your students' thinking, I guess is the way I'd say it. You can foster higher order thinking. If you would ask students in response to a reading, let's say, to say, list 3 of the author's main points. Well, that's remembering, right? You're just remembering the main points. But if instead you'd say something like, reread the bottom of page 38 and analyze what the author is saying. Do you agree or disagree? And that gets you into evaluating. Those kinds of questions can really help your students to think more deeply and actually engage more deeply with the content of the course.